The year was 1872, and the Montana frontier was a place where the land itself seemed to test men's will to live. The sky that morning stretched wide and heavy, bruised shades of gray and violet rolling above endless prairies. The promise of rain was out there, but it hung like a taunt, the kind of storm that broke crops instead of saving them. Wind whistled sharp across the grasslands, rattling the warped boards of a barn that had seen too many winters and not enough repairs. Inside, the air was thick with a musky scent of hay and horse sweat. A man worked in silence, his shoulders stooped, his movements tired but steady, as if every shovel of straw was measured against the years pressing down on him. His name was Elias Carter. Once he had been a soldier. Once he had been a husband. Once he had even been a man people looked up to. Now he was only a rancher whose boots were cracked through at the soles, whose shirt carried more patches than cloth, and whose eyes no longer looked at the horizon with hope, but with suspicion. His farm had shrunk to almost nothing after the war. Cattle lost to rustlers, fields wasted by drought, debts piled so high he could no longer see above them. His house was a shell, his land brittle and tired, his heart lonelier still. That morning, as a shovel struck against the barn's dirt floor, he heard something that was not wind or rain or horse. Footsteps, slow, dragging footsteps coming up the path. Elias's muscles stiffened. On this land, an unexpected visitor was rarely a friend. He set down the shovel and reached for the rifle leaning in the corner, old, pitted with rust, but still firing straight enough. His fingers wrapped around the stock out of habit, out of survival. The barn door creaked, hinges protesting as it swung open, and in the doorway stood not a bandit or a debt collector, but a woman. Her figure was outlined in the pale light outside, shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, skirts heavy with dust and travel. She looked younger than Elias, though not by much, with the kind of tired eyes that spoke of nights without sleep and days without comfort. Mud caked her boots, and strands of hair clung damp to her cheeks. Her voice, when it came, was soft but cracked, roughened by thirst. "Sir," she said, hesitant, standing at the threshold as if she might bolt at the wrong look from him. "I don't mean to trouble you, but if you let me clean your barn, would you spare me a plate of food?" The request hung in the dusty air. Elias felt his chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. His hand slackened on the rifle. The pitchfork he'd been using slipped from his other hand and landed with a dull thud. For one heartbeat, he thought he was seeing a ghost. Her face was not the same, but something in the way she stood there, in the tremor of her voice, carried him back to a memory that still cut deep. Clara, his wife, had once stood in that same barn years ago, asking for his trust, asking for his hand in marriage when both of them were young and reckless enough to believe love could weather anything. Clara had been lost to him for nearly a decade now, taken by a fever that no prayer could drive away. He had buried her on the rise beyond the creek. He had promised himself he would never look for her likeness in the faces of strangers. And yet here he was, staring at this woman, unable to breathe. She wasn't Clara. He knew that. But grief is a trickster, and sometimes it paints the living with the brush of the dead. The silence stretched. The woman's hands gripped her shawl tighter, bracing for rejection or worse. She had seen enough doors close in her face to expect another. Elias found his voice, though it came out gruff, roughened by years of disuse. "Food scarce here," he muttered. "Ain't much left worth sharing." His eyes studied her, measuring the truth in her desperation. Finally, he added, "But if you're willing to work, I reckon I can spare a plate." Her shoulders sagged in relief, a faint exhale breaking from her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, almost as if the word itself cost her strength she didn't have to spare. And so it began. Through the long day, Elias watched as she set herself to work. She took up a broom, then a rag, then a bucket, scrubbing until her hands were red and blistered. Dust rose in swirls as she swept out the corners where cobwebs clung. She stacked hay with care, soothed the horses when thunder rolled, and patched a tear in the barn's cloth curtain, without being asked. Her every motion was sharp with purpose, as though she feared being cast out if she faltered even once. Hunger lived in her movements. Hunger not only for food, but for safety, for a chance of belonging even for a night. When dusk fell, Elias set a chip plate on the rough wooden table inside the house. a half loaf of bread, a strip of salted pork, and a tin cup of weak coffee. Hardly a meal worth offering, but to the woman it was a feast. She sat straight back to the edge of the chair, eating slowly, carefully, as if each bite was something to be savored rather than consumed. Elias sat across from her in silence, the only sounds a scrape of fork against tin and the soft drip of rain beginning outside. After a while, he cleared his throat. "What's your name?" She looked up, hesitated, then answered quietly, Mara Whitfield." The name meant nothing to him. No family he'd heard of, no nearby townsfolk. But the way she said it told him there were stories tied to it. Chapters she wasn't ready to read aloud. Elias didn't press her. He had his own silences, his own wounds. He understood the weight of things left unsaid. When the meal was done, Mara rose and offered to wash the plate. Elias let her. He watched her as she moved, a kind of wary grace in every step. She was not a woman accustomed to asking for help. She was a woman accustomed to fighting for scraps. That night, when she bedded down in the barn on a pile of hay, Elias lay awake in his cabin, staring at the ceiling. The storm outside rattled the windows, but it wasn't thunder that kept him restless. It was the question of who Mara Whitfield truly was, and why fate had led her to his door. He told himself she was just a stranger, a weary traveler passing through. He told himself she would leave in the morning. But deep in his chest, in that place where grief still carved hollows, something had stirred. Something he had thought was long dead. Hope, or maybe danger. Time would tell the difference. The storm did not wait long to test them. By the second night, the sky above the valley cracked wide open, spilling rain that turned the dirt to rivers of mud. The wind howled like wolves circling a campfire, prying at every loose board in the house. The old barn shuddered, its roof leaking, water dripping into buckets Mara had dragged into place. The horses stamped nervously, tossing their heads against the rising thunder. Elias worked alongside her, nailing planks where he could, throwing canvas over the worst leaks. But it was Mara who impressed him most, her arms trembling, her clothes soaked through, yet she kept moving, dragging sacks of feet away from the water, soothing the mare that threatened to break its tether. She worked as if she had lived storms like this before, storms that demanded everything from you and left nothing in return. By dawn the land was sodden. The creek at the edge of Elias's ranch had swollen, frothing with mud and branches. Mara's shawl clung to her like a second skin as she wrung it dry by the fire, her hands red and raw. Elias poured her the last of the coffee. She sipped, eyes distant, always distant. That was when Elias began to notice it. Her gaze wandered, often toward the horizon, always toward the dark line of hills beyond the prairie. She listened for things he could not hear. She startled at sounds most folks ignored. He recognized it, because he had once been the same. Soldiers never stopped looking over their shoulder for battles that followed them home. One night, when lightning forked across the sky and the wind rattled the shutters, Elias found her outside again, standing in the rain. She stared out into the blackness, unmoving, as though waiting. "What are you looking for?" Elias asked from the doorway, his voice carrying low against the storm. Her answer came in a whisper, nearly drowned by the wind. "Trouble." He frowned, but she said no more. She pulled the shawl tighter, as if that would shield her from more than just the weather. Elias wanted to press her, demand the truth, but he knew better than most that some truths only came when forced into the light. It came sooner than he expected. 2 nights later, the rain had thinned to a drizzle. The ground was slick, the air cold with the smell of wet earth. Elias was patching the barn fence when he heard it, the distant pounding of hooves. His blood ran cold. No neighbor would ride at this hour. He stepped into the open, rifle slung in his arms. And then he saw them, 3 riders cutting through the mist, wide-brimmed hats pulled low, pistols at their sides. Their horses moved with practiced ease. Men used long rides and quick violence. They came not with curiosity, but with purpose. The leader, a scar slashing across his cheek, reined in at the edge of Elias's yard. His voice cut through the night like a blade. "Whitfield, we know you're here." Mara froze behind Elias. Her breath hitched. Color drained from her face. For one moment, Elias saw something break inside her. Then she forced her jaw tight, though her hands trembled against her skirt. Elias turned sharply. "You know them?" She didn't answer at first. He saw the war inside her, the instinct to run, the fear of dragging anyone else down with her. Finally, her voice cracked. "I ran from them." Her eyes glistened in the dim light. "They ain't lawmen. They're worse. My husband owed them money. When he couldn't pay, they—" She faltered, choking on the memory. "I had to leave. I had to." The riders shouted again, threatening now. Elias's stomach twisted. Bandits, debt collectors, killers, men who saw weakness and squeezed it dry. For years, Elias had lived quiet, swallowing his pride, burying the soldier he once was. But the sight of Mara's fear, the sound of those men spitting her name into the night, lit something old and dangerous inside him. He remembered holding a rifle under cannon fire. He remembered brothers bleeding into the mud. And he remembered the vow he had made over Clara's grave, that he would never again stand by while the world took from him. He looked at Mara, drenched in fear and silence, and he made his choice. "Bar the doors," he told her. They scrambled together, dragging planks, heaving barrels against the entry. Mara's fingers shook, but held steady as she latched the window shutters. Outside, the riders cursed, circling like wolves. Then came the pounding at the barn door. Wood rattled. Elias leveled his rifle at the dark. When the door cracked under force, he fired. The shot rang like thunder, echoing into the storm-laden hills. The horses outside reared, snorting in panic. The bandits cursed and scattered, shots answering in the night, but finding nothing but walls. Elias fired again, and the silence that followed was heavier than any rain. Hooves faded into the distance, leaving only the wind. Inside, Elias stood panting, the rifle hot in his hands. Mara leaned against the wall, her chest heaving, eyes wide. "They'll be back," Elias said grimly. "Men like that don't walk away." She nodded, pressing her lips together until they whitened. Later, by the low glow of the hearth, Mara finally spoke of her past. Words fell halting, as if every syllable cut her open. She spoke of her husband's debts, of nights filled with fists and empty promises, of the day she ran when she realized the men who came to collect would sooner kill than forgive. She had walked for days, through rain and hunger, carrying nothing but the will to survive. Elias listened, silent. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He saw enough in her eyes. Pain recognized pain. Loss recognized loss. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel quite so alone in his silence. Mara sat back, staring into the fire. "They won't stop," she murmured. "They'll follow until I got nothing left." Elias's jaw tightened. His gaze went to the rifle propped against the wall, then to the window where the storm hissed against the glass. "They'll have to take this ranch from me first," he said, his voice low, steady, carrying the weight of every battle he'd fought and every grave he'd dug. In the long silence that followed, something unspoken passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. And so, in a storm-beaten ranch on the Montana frontier, two broken souls sat side by side, listening to the rain, waiting for trouble they both knew was coming. Morning broke gray and brittle, the kind of dawn where even the sun seemed too weary to rise. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the mud that clung to boots, in the damp air heavy with silence. Elias stood on the porch, staring out at the sodden fields. He saw the tracks in the earth. Their horses had circled in the night, testing his defenses, promising they would return. His stomach clenched. They were not finished, not by a long mile. Mara came out behind him, wrapping the threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. She didn't need to ask what he was thinking. Her eyes followed the same tracks, her silence carrying the same truth. Those men would not let go. Not until they had her. Not until they had made an example of her for running. Elias turned to her. His voice was rough. "They'll be back today. You know that." Her lips parted, but no words came at first. She only nodded, eyes dropping to the muddy boards beneath her feet. Then she whispered, "You don't have to do this. They came for me. Not you." Elias almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. This ranch may be falling apart, but it's mine, and I don't give up to the likes of them. Not now, not ever." His jaw tightened. "And you? You asked me for food. You gave me your work. That's enough to make you worth fighting for." Her eyes flicked up, wet the edges, but she said nothing more. She didn't thank him. Maybe she couldn't. But her silence carried more weight than words ever could. By noon the sky had cleared, sharp blue, stretching wide and merciless. That was when the hooves came again. 5 riders this time, pounding across the plain in a cloud of dust. They were not creeping now. They came loud, certain, guns gleaming in the sunlight. Elias's blood surged hot and cold all at once. He gripped the rifle tighter, knuckles white. "Stay close," he told Mara. She already had the revolver in her hands, her fingers trembling, but her jaw set. The riders fanned out as they neared the yard, horses kicking up dirt. The scarred leader raised his pistol high, grinning. "You had your warning. Carter, hand her over, or we'll burn you out." Elias stepped forward, rifle leveled, voice steady. "You'll get her over my grave." The leader spat into the dust. "So be it." Then the world erupted. Gunfire cracked sharp against the silence, echoing across the plain. Elias fired first, the recoil slamming his shoulder as the nearest rider reeled back, his horse screaming and stumbling. Mara flinched at the shot, but she did not run. She raised a revolver, hand shaking, and fired at another who had swung wide toward the barn. The shot grazed his arm, sending him swearing and clutching his reins. The ranch became a battlefield. Dust exploded with every hoofbeat. Bullets splintered wood from the fence posts. Elias fired again, teeth clenched, and another rider toppled from his saddle, crashing into the mud with a sickening thud. The rifle grew hot, his breast ragged, but he kept moving, kept shooting. A bullet seared past his head, close enough to singe the air. Another tore into his shoulder, grazing flesh. He stumbled, teeth bared against the pain, but steadied himself. Blood seeped through his shirt, but he held his ground. Mara's revolver cracked again, her arms trembling violently. This time the bullet struck true, lodging in the leg of a rider charging her way. His horse veered off, throwing him into the dirt. She gasped, staring at the smoking gun in her hand, her face pale with shock at what she had done. Elias's voice cut through, harsh and urgent. "Don't stop. Keep fighting." The leader roared, charging straight at Elias with pistol blazing. Elias dropped behind a water trough, splinters biting his skin as bullets ripped the wood apart. He rose just long enough to fire back. The leader's hat flew off, and his horse shrieked, rearing. The man swore and wheeled away, retreating into the dust. When the smoke began to clear, silence settled heavy. 2 men lay still in the mud. Another crawled away, bleeding. The last 2 had turned tail, retreating into the hills with curses trailing behind them. Their horses' hoofbeats faded into the wide emptiness of the land. Elias sank to his knees, chest heaving. The rifle slipped from his hands. Blood from his shoulders soaked into the mud. The world spun, but he clenched his teeth and forced himself upright. He was alive, and so was Mara. She ran to him, hands grasping at his arm. "You're hurt," she said, her voice breaking. He looked at her, sweat and blood mingling on his face, and for the first time in years he smiled. Not wide, not bright, but real. "I've been worse." She laughed once, shaky, almost disbelieving, and pressed her shawl against his wound. Together, they stood in the silence of the aftermath, the ranch scarred but still standing, 2 survivors against a world that had wanted them broken. Days passed. Elias mended what he could, his shoulder stiff but healing. Mara tended the barn, moving with quiet strength. The land around them looked different now. Not safer, but somehow less lonely. They shared meals by firelight, spoke in short sentences that carried more than words. Trust had grown between them, slow and steady, like roots pushing through dry earth. But both knew it could not last. One morning, as the sun rose gold over the valley, Mara packed her few belongings into a worn cloth bundle. Elias watched from the porch, his chest heavy, his hands restless at his sides. "I can't stay," she said softly. Her eyes did not meet his. They'll keep coming. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but they won't stop. I won't put you through that again. Elias swallowed his throat tight. Every part of him wanted to argue, to beg her to stay. But he had lived long enough to know when a truth was immovable. She was right. Her presence was a danger as much as it was a comfort. Still, as she stepped past him, he reached out and caught her arm. She turned, startled, and their eyes locked. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost," he said, his voice low but steady. "Hope." Her lips trembled. Her eyes shone. "And you gave me something I never thought I had. A reason to fight." For a long moment, neither moved. The dawn stretched golden around them, painting their faces in light. Then Mara gently pulled her arm free. She turned and walked toward the horizon, her figure growing smaller against the wide land. Elias stood there until she vanished, the barn at his back, the empty fields before him. He felt the ache in his shoulder, the sting of loss fresh again. But beneath it all, for the first time in years, there was a spark, a stubborn fire that whispered maybe he was not finished yet. The ranch still stood, the land still breathed, and Elias Carter was still alive. In the end, perhaps that was enough. The narrator's voice closes. In the harsh lands of the frontier, survival was more than food and shelter. It was trust forged in fire and storm. Elias and Mara may have walked different paths, but for a fleeting moment, they reminded each other what it meant to live. A pause, then the call to action. If this story touched you, if you felt Elias's struggle, if you felt Mara's courage, don't forget to like this video, share with others, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the strength we carry, even in our darkest hours.